So, thank you, Stephanie. My name is Marcelo Leite. I'm a science journalist with Folha de São Paulo in Brazil, which is the leading daily newspaper there, and an advisor to Chacruna Institute. So I thank the Chacruna Institute, Bia, and Clancy for inviting me to be here today with you. Hope you are having a great time at the Psychedelic Culture Conference, as much as I am having. What a beautiful conference and crowd. We are here at the stage today to debate on a very sensitive and momentaneous issue pertaining to the psychedelic culture, the gap and the tensions between indigenous shamanism and psychedelic science, and more importantly, how to bridge that gap. In my opinion, it's not acceptable that we go on like that without proper recognition for the legacy of shamans and other traditional healers, and from the side of the biomedical research, and without widespread mechanisms for benefit sharing. To discuss this important topic, Chacruna has gathered this incredible panel of activists and scholars, Adana, Omágua, Kambeba, Sidarta, Ribeiro, Brian Anderson, and Laura Dev. And I will let them introduce themselves, then we go to some individual questions that we have prepared, and then general questions for you, all of you to jump in. And later we would welcome questions from the public. So I'll let them introduce themselves, and I would go first with Adana. Adana, por favor. Você se apresenta e depois a gente passa para as questões.
Olá, todo mundo, a todos. Eu me chamo Adana, sou do povo Omágua Kambeba.
Hello, everybody. My name is Adana from the people of Omágua Kambeba.
Sou da Amazônia, saí da Amazônia para cursar medicina em Minas Gerais.
I'm from the Amazon region, and I left my region to study medicine in the southern state of Minas Gerais.
E também faço um trabalho, um estudo xamânico com outros pajés.
I'm also undergoing education with elders, shamans, pajés.
Tentando provocar um diálogo entre as duas medicinas, medicina tradicional indígena e a medicina científica oficial.
Trying to provoke a dialogue between the two medicines, the traditional medicine and the biomedical medicine.
Venho conquistando aos poucos no meu país um pouco do espaço para dialogar sobre as duas medicinas.
And I'm gaining some space in my country so that we can open and establish this dialogue between the two disciplines.
Dos anseios do movimento indígena é justamente que a nossa saúde também seja respeitada com as medicinas tradicionais.
One of the desires or the needs that we have is that our values are respected, that they're understood and respected.
E as medicinas tradicionais também incluem os psicodélicos.
This applies for traditional medicine as well as for psychedelics in general.
E eu estou nesse momento também fazendo parte da comissão do Conselho Federal de Medicina para tratar esse assunto no meu país.
At this moment, I'm part of a committee established by the Federal Council of Medicine of Brazil, a national institution in Brazil, to discuss how can these demands be met.
E eu estou muito grata pela oportunidade de estar aqui.
And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here.
Gratidão.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adana. So I'll now go with Sidarta. You already have the mic. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Marcelo. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be here with you all. my fellows here, as well as you here in this beautiful theater. It's my first time here. Thank you, Bia. I'm really proud to be part of Chacruna and to be together with you to have this discussion. So I really want to thank the whole Chacruna team for all the effort to put this together. I'm a biologist. I'm a brain scientist. And I entered the psychedelic research movement. And the psychedelic movement in a more political aspect from my work on dreaming. So because I do work on sleep and memory and dreaming, I eventually became interested in psychedelics, and this is when I started to meet all these very interesting people and got more and more into that, so thank you.
Very short introduction. So please, Laura, it's your time.
Hello. Hi, everyone. So nice to be here with all of you and all of you. And thanks to Chacruna for having us here and participating in this dialogue all day. It's been very enlightening. So I'm Laura Dev. I'm trained as a political ecologist, and I study relationships between people and plants. And specifically, I work, for the last 10 years, I've been working in Shipibo communities in the Amazon of Peru, where I study relationships between people and plants, but specifically because in those communities there's been a lot of ayahuasca tourism and commodification of the plants. So looking at, as those plants are commodified, how those relationships change, and how relationships also change between Shipibo communities and outsiders through these processes. Right now I'm working as faculty at the University of Wisconsin in Platteville, formerly of the Bay Area. So it's nice to be back. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Brian?
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. It's great to be part of another annual Chacruna meeting. These have been going on for a few years, and I've had the pleasure of being a friend and a participant in the Chacruna community since it was formally founded here in 2019. But this community of friends and investigators and organizers has been going on for much longer. I've been friends and colleagues with Bia only since 2006. And we're still friends, which says something. I'm here, I think, because I am a medical doctor, so I'm a psychiatrist here in San Francisco. I do research on mental health, public health, including psychedelics. And I have a background also in the social sciences. And so as someone who does biomedical research on psychedelics and controlled substance use in different settings, I also came to this work many years ago, having experiences in churches in Brazil, having the opportunity to learn with traditional medicine holders that work with these plants in ceremonial settings that are respected in their communities and recognized in their countries. And so I try to sort of bring some of that awareness to what we can do with biomedical research here in this country and elsewhere. And so I'm really looking forward to having this discussion with you all today.
Thank you. So now, going into the proper discussion, I would like to start by asking Adana. Adana, what were the reasons that led you to study Western medicine, and how, in your practice as a healer, do you reconcile these two kinds of knowledge and healing procedures?
Eu fui fazer medicina porque, desde criança, eu fui apresentando os sinais.
I decided to take this path and study medicine because since I was a child, there were signs.
Nas culturas indígenas, depender do povo, a gente vai observando nas crianças os sinais que elas vão apresentando.
So depending on which indigenous people you're considering, there are different ways in which people observe as the children are growing up, the different signs that they will show about the path to be taken.
Os mais velhos e os meus pais, mãe, perceberam que tinha algo diferente em mim.
Her elders noticed something different about her.
Muito criança, eu já cuidava de animais, de plantas e de pessoas.
When she was quite young, she was already taking care of people, animals, and plants.
Pequena já tinha grandes responsabilidades.
And she took great responsibilities even when she was quite young.
Com 9 a 10 anos de idade, eu era tida como uma conselheira.
Between 9 and 10, she was she had the role of counselor.
As pessoas com idade para ser meus avós vinham até mim pedir conselhos,
Even her grandparents came to her to ask for advice,
pedir orientação.
to be guided.
E viam que tinha algumas coisas que aconteciam que não tinha muita explicação vindo de mim.
And there were things that were baffling that people would not quite figure out.
E, ao mesmo tempo, na Amazônia, é muito difícil ter acesso a médicos e médicas.
And also, one must remember that it's very hard in the middle of the Amazon to have access to medical doctors.
Junto com esses sinais que foi me apresentando desde criança, também estava vivendo a realidade sofrida na Amazônia.
So on one hand, there was this call from her childhood, and on the other hand, the sheer necessity, the sheer needs of the people in very dire conditions.
Então, essas duas situações me levaram a fazer um curso médico,
So those two things converged to push me towards medicine,
para atender esses sinais e, ao mesmo tempo, atender uma situação social, de necessidade daquela região.
to answer this call and at the same time to answer the need of the population.
Então, eu passei na UFMG, que é tida como uma das 5 melhores do Brasil.
So she passed this very difficult exam to have access to the Federal University of Minas Gerais, one of the 5 top universities in Brazil.
E posso dizer que foi um verdadeiro impacto cultural para mim.
And it was a very strong cultural impact for her to begin at the university.
Nunca vi tanto individualismo e competição numa classe médica.
She never saw so much competition and egotism and individualism as among the medical students and environment.
E como o ensino era muito pragmático, veia as pessoas como fragmentos compartimentalizados.
And how the teaching was so pragmatic and so willing to take people as just parts, things and objects.
Eu cheguei a entrar numa situação de crise, de problema interno comigo, quando eu via e dizia, isso não tem nada a ver com o que eu aprendi na Amazônia.
She had a serious crisis herself, and she said, "This has nothing to do with what I've learned so far in the Amazon."
E às vezes que eu tentei aplicar alguma coisa que eu tinha aprendido dentro de consultório médico, eu era chamada pelos médicos. Atenção.
And every time she tried to apply anything that she had from traditional indigenous knowledge in her practice, she was scolded by her superiors.
E eles deixavam bem claro, aqui você está dentro da academia médica, então você está aprendendo, é assim que vamos te ensinar e é assim que você tem que fazer.
And saying it very clearly to her that she had to obey, she had to comply, telling her this is how it works here, you're inside the medicine academia and you're going to have to follow those rules.
E aí eu aprendi e prometi a mim mesma que quando eu saísse de lá, eu iria fazer um diálogo das duas medicinas.
And she said, "Okay, I'll learn it. I'll do what you're asking, but then when I leave, I will really establish a dialogue between those two fields."
Já que dentro da academia médica não me era permitido fazer isso.
Since inside that place or during that trajectory, she was not really able to do that.
Grata.
But
Thank you.
may I have a follow-up? But in the hospital you work in a hospital that is dedicated to humanized childbirth. Are the practices that you bring from your village, from your people, are they accepted in this particular hospital?
Atualmente você tem aceitação no seu hospital para fazer as suas práticas tradicionais?
Então, eu estou atuando agora em 2 hospitais. No Hospital Sofia Feldman, que é uma referência no Brasil em partos humanizados.
So currently I work in 2 hospitals. One, Sophia Feldman, which is a national reference for como é que você falou? Humanized childbirth.
E também num hospital campanha da dengue, porque em Minas Gerais, em Belo Horizonte, entrou em calamidade pública o sistema. Muitos casos de dengue.
And also she's working at Hospital de Campanha is like a hospital that is set to confront an epidemics, for example, which currently is going on about dengue fever.
E também atuo como médica prescritora de cannabis no Brasil.
And she's also prescribing cannabis in Brazil. She's part of that community in Brazil.
Além de fazer trabalhos voluntários na medicina de família e comunidade.
And does also voluntary work as family medicine.
Então, dentro do Hospital Sofia Feldman, eles são bem compreensivos e abertos para a medicina tradicional indígena.
In the first hospital that she mentioned, they're very open to traditional indigenous medicine.
E eles atendem também população em geral, inclusive população indígena.
Além da população indígena.
Eles atendem a população no geral, além da população indígena.
So they actually cover both indigenous population and non-indigenous population.
E aconteceu já situações bem delicadas. Uma delas posso relatar aqui.
She has lived some very delicate situations. She will tell one here.
O país Venezuela que teve uma quebra política e econômica, então muitos indígenas do povo Aral, além de outros venezuelanos, foram para o Brasil.
There was a serious crisis in Venezuela, political, economical, and there was major migration, including indigenous peoples, including the people Warao.
Muitas das pessoas do povo Aral não sabem falar a língua portuguesa, só sabem falar a língua nativa e o portunhol.
Many of them only speak their own original native language, as well as a mix of Portuguese and Spanish, portunhol.
Então, o pajé e a sua esposa foram ter um bebezinho recém-nascido no hospital.
The shaman and his wife came to the hospital for her to deliver their baby.
Eles são do povo Uaral. Ele falava portunhol e ela não falava nada de português.
And he could speak some portunhol, some mix Portuguese and Spanish, but she didn't speak that at all. No Portuguese, no Spanish.
A criança recém-nascida apresentou sepse presumível, ou seja, estava espalhando a bactéria no corpo todo.
The baby had, the newborn had sepsis, and it was spreading through the whole body.
Os médicos e a enfermagem precisaram entubar o recém-nascido para salvá-lo.
The medical doctors wanted to ventilate, to sedate and ventilate the newborn.
E entrar com antibióticos.
And put a lot of antibiotics.
Mas o pajé disse que não ia permitir, porque não estava aceitando.
And the shaman said, "No, I will not allow it."
Então eu fui acionada.
And she was called to solve this struggle.
Então, quando eu cheguei lá, estava uma situação muito tensa no CTI do hospital.
When she got there was a very tense situation in the intensive care unit of the hospital.
O recém-nascido estava piorando e estava morrendo.
The newborn was going to die.
A mãe estava do lado e ninguém conseguia chegar perto da criança.
The mother was next to the baby and she wouldn't allow anybody to get
E o pajé
close.
também do lado, também não deixava ninguém chegar perto da criança.
Together with the shaman.
A enfermeira e a assistente social tentaram chegar perto e a mãe pegou as sandálias e começou a jogar na enfermagem e jogar na assistente social.
The nurse and the social assistant, I don't know how you say this, social worker, try to do something about it, and the mother would throw the sandals on them.
E quando eu fui chegando no corredor, eu vi o rosto das pessoas da área da saúde, todo mundo. Ela chegou.
When she was arriving through the halls, she could see in the faces of the people the relief, saying, "Oh, she's here."
Como se eu
She's
pudesse.
crying. She's crying right
Como
now.
se eu pudesse, como se eu tivesse resposta para aquilo.
As if she could give an answer to this situation.
Mal sabiam que eu estava com tanto medo.
And they didn't know she was very scared.
É um desafio muito grande você colocar em diálogo as duas medicinas.
It's very challenging to actually have those medicines in dialogue.
Então, quando eu entrei no CTI, o pai e a mãe me viram, a equipe médica também ficou todo mundo me olhando porque eu entrei na porta.
When she opened the door in the intensive care unit, the family stopped and stared at her, and so did the medical doctors, the team of doctors there assembled.
Essa mãe desarmou, ela olhou
The mother relaxed,
e ela andou até a mim.
and she walked towards her,
Colocou a mão aqui por trás das minhas costas,
put the hand behind her,
me trouxe perto e arrastando bem o português.
brought her next to the baby, and slowly, in very difficult Portuguese,
Meu bebê está bem.
she said, "My baby is okay.
Ele come e faz cocô.
He eats and shits.
Ele está bem, ele precisa ir para casa.
He's all right. We need to go home."
Ela não estava entendendo que a criança dela estava morrendo.
She didn't understand that the kid was dying.
Então, os médicos me mostraram o prontuário e eu li.
The medical doctor showed her the medical record, and she read it to the mother.
Pedi uma sala para conversar com o pai e com a mãe
She asked for a separate space to talk to mom and dad,
e dialoguei do jeito indígena, explicando o que estava acontecendo.
and she explained to them in the indigenous way what was going on.
Ela entendeu,
She got it,
baixou a cabeça e começou a chorar.
started to cry,
E eu disse, eu vou fazer um rezo. Você confia em mim?
and she said, "I'm going to pray. Do you trust me?"
Então, eu fui fazer o rezo no bebê, dentro do CTI.
And then she started to pray
E eu disse para
over the
a equipe
baby.
médica, pode entrar com a intubação e com antibiótico.
And she said, "You guys can come in and ventilate and put the antibiotics."
Depois fiz um rezo no pajé e na esposa.
And then she prayed with the shaman and the mom,
Eles falaram que se sentiram muito bem com o meu rezo.
and they felt really well.
Depois de 5 dias eu retornei para fazer mais rezo.
After 5 days, she came back to pray more.
No dia seguinte do rezo, a criança recebeu alta.
The next day, the newborn was
Na, com-
released.
na compreensão do pajé, o que salvou o bebê foi o rezo.
For the shaman, what saved the baby was the prayer.
Na compreensão dos médicos foi o antibiótico.
And for the medical doctors, it was the antibiotics.
Não importa quem
And
está
it
com a
doesn't
razão.
matter who's right.
Nós salvamos uma vida.
The life was saved.
Isso é o que importa.
That's what matters.
That's a very, very good answer. Very good. So now I'll pass over to Sidarta. And Sidarta, in the 20th century, the biomedical sciences have failed to recognize the reality of spiritual experiences. But psychology and neuroscience in the 21st century actually provide a basis for acknowledging these entities as real embodied phenomena. Is such a scientific perspective sufficient to dialogue and cooperate with the indigenous perspectives?
No.
Short answer. Please elaborate.
Agora você vai traduzir para ela. Okay. I really like this question. And I think it's really interesting. It wouldn't make sense 20 years ago, but nowadays we can talk about those things, in a way that is still very imprecise, but already quite interesting. What neuroscience did in the 20th century was, to a large extent, the cognitive part of neuroscience, is to take over a big chunk of psychology, which we could call behaviorism or experimental psychology. quantitative assessment of behavior based on stimulus and response. And neuroscience did this quite well. This was actually anticipated by Konrad Lorenz in 1946 or 47 when he wrote his first book. He said, this is going to happen. But neuroscience did not go much beyond that. So the neuroscience of the 21st century that you are mentioning here, that serves as a link or a bridge with the world of spirits, is only recently, in the past 20 years, been part of the interest in the neuroscientific community, and not very much so. I'm referring to depth psychology. I'm referring to the part of psychology that actually wants to go beyond behavior and wants to talk about the structures, the mental maps, the mental topographies, the inner world that has a very complex configuration, and we know still so little about it. The work that I like to bring to this discussion, to help the discussion, is the work of Rodrigo Kian Quiroga at Leicester University in the UK, who showed 20 years ago that if you put an electrode, a metal electrode inside the hippocampus of a person, you will find neurons that are not responding to the stimulus of the environment in terms of its physical quality or chemical quality, but in terms of the terms of your own inner reality. Why? Because those neurons, they don't care about just the color, the brightness, the orientation of the angles, or anything in the environment. They care about characters, individuals. They care about people you know, and they care about Homer Simpson, and they care about Luke Skywalker. I'm not kidding, this is a Nature paper. They're neurons, they really like Luke Skywalker, and they don't fire to the image of Emma Thompson, to the image of Sylvester Stallone. They do like Master Yoda a little bit, which shows that, at the neuronal level, there's some admixture.
There's a neuron for Yoda, right?
Well, so if you find a neuron that likes Master Yoda a lot, so of course you're finding one neuron, but there's 86 billion neurons in our brains. So we're talking about actually a huge collection of neurons that respond in a very complex spatio-temporal way, one activating the next, forming a chain of events that somehow comprise the body of Master Yoda in your mind, right? So this is the part of neuroscience that is saying, our mind is composed of entities, of mind creatures. And this is, of course, for Freudians or for Jungians, even more so for Jungians, this is obvious. This is just what we need to study. But this is not so for most of neuroscience, and this is not so for most of psychology nowadays. Very pragmatic psychology, make people function, right? But this is the case when we're trying to establish a dialogue with traditional indigenous knowledge. So then the discussion is whether the body of the spirits is an extra physical, not in this world, extra world, fifth dimension realm, and it might, or whether it's a mental reality. But in that sense, this knowledge is sufficient to begin a dialogue, because then you can say, okay, let's put aside our differences about what is the body of the spirit, and let's talk about the fact that when the spirit is here, many things can happen that cannot happen when the spirit is not here. And when I mean it's here, it means that we are sharing the belief that it's here. So this is a dialogue that I can have with my friend Bia, an anthropologist, and we don't even need to disagree on anything, because we can agree to talk about the part that we agree on. And that is that the world of spirits is tremendously important for healing. This is obvious for all the indigenous peoples, and for medicine nowadays it is not. When you go to the intensive care unit, you do not find anything that can help you in that regard, unless you have Adana coming, intervening, right? And I want to, stop here by saying one more thing. I answered no in the beginning because I think that for most neuroscientists, they won't even think that what I said here is very relevant. So this is not mainstream neuroscience. I think it's the neuroscience of the future. That is, it began 20 years ago. But there's another problem, and this is more complicated, which is the conflict of interest of medicine and of biomedical sciences in general, who are so much in bed with the capital, with money, with the all the hype, all the hype around psychedelics. That the only thing this whole world won't is that we recognize the reality of spirits, because they actually want to keep telling the story that depression, that suffering, that mental illness is not socially constructed. It's actually a disorder, it's a genetic problem that you need to address with a certain chemical. And if you could, the extreme version of this is let's use a chemical that does not produce any alterity, that does not induce any mental change, that will not put you out of your comfort zone, that will not allow you to see how sick this whole system is, that will just, let's replace fluoxetine with ketamine, or LSD, or psilocybin, or whatever. And if possible, with a drug that we don't know the name, but it's patented, and it produces plasticity without psychedelia. Sanitizing psychedelics to the extreme. I really don't believe that this is the path to be taken, but I can see that this is a path being taken, and in a huge way. I mean, it's in a mammoth way. I believe in guerrilla movements. I believe in, I believe that even though the behemoth seems unsurmountable, it's also quite recent. And so when I sit next to Adana and she shares her experience, this is coming from such an older root, and I have hope in that.
Thank you. It's good that at least we have some guerrillero psychologists, neuroscientists, and psychiatrists. Some of them are here at the stage today. And I think that there's also some change in the attitude that science in general, or very small minorities in science, related to plants. And so I'll go over to Laura and ask her, how are the relationships between plants and people changing as psychedelic plants and rituals become global commodities?
Thank you. And thank you, Sidarta, for talking about spirits, because I want to talk more about plant spirits. And so many of you, most of you probably know, but for indigenous peoples all over the Amazon, and for specifically the people I work with in Shipibo communities and the healers there, plants are not so much seen as just resources. Ayahuasca's not a drug or a substance, but it's a being with a spirit that can teach and heal, and that they're in active relationship with through healing practices. And I think that, with the nature of capitalism, it tends to, deanimate, or get rid of that animate aspect of the things that end up becoming commodities. They end up becoming, something that can then be exploited and extracted and taken out of those types of relationships that people have been building with them over, many generations. And so I think that's kind of the nature of where, commodification in general, but I also think that the picture with ayahuasca is also more complex than that, because we also see that as it becomes, a globalized commodity and sensation, that there's all of these new types of people that are now in relationship with these plants, and also coming into more of a recognition that these plants can be in a relationship with them as entities that have some sort of a spirit and that are some way animated. And so I think that even as capitalism tries to enfold plants into these de-animated commodities, that there's kind of this subversive way that the plants have of forming their relationships with people anyway. But that's not to say that, even though many of these relationships with people that are not indigenous from, the global north, from elsewhere, are able to relate with these plants, and that it's inspired by indigenous practices and indigenous ideas of relating with spirits, that it's not the same type of relationship or the same understanding of spirits that indigenous peoples have about the plants. And so I do see some ways that that's kind of shifting as these plants come into relationship with a whole bunch of other types of people that maybe didn't grow up with the idea of spirits or as plants as animate beings. And some of the things that I see in my work is, one of the things is that plants become more instrumentalized, so they become more of a tool for, the person's process, seen as a medicine, like more of a medicine type of pill that can be taken to enact healing. Also, I see changes in the understanding of power and where power is located in the process of healing. So thinking about, what I call the humanization of power, I think happens where oftentimes the power is often projected on the humans that are involved, whether it's the person who is, healing themselves, or the healer who is enacting healing. And that's pretty different from a lot of the indigenous conceptions that I understand, and recognizing that I'm also not indigenous, so I don't have a perfect understanding of these things, but these are some of the kind of discrepancies that I've seen. That the power for the Shipibo healers that I have spoken with is lives in the spirit world and is channeled through channeled in collaboration with the plants. So that power that is located in the spirit world does not belong to that person, and the plant and the healer together channel that power. And so I think that that's something that we see kind of shifting, is like the power ends up being more granted to human actors in these spaces. And then, and then another aspect, let me look at my notes because I had one more thing I wanted to say about that. The other thing is that healing tends to be more individualized. So healing is, in our Western model of healing, it's an individual affair. It's the, disease model that Adana's talked about and other people have mentioned, where, the disease lives in the human body and they're receiving healing. Whereas in the indigenous communities I work in, the healing is seen as a relational process, and it involves human and non-human entities. And disease can be caused by an imbalance in relationships. And it has to be corrected in relationship with those beings and with other people as well. And so I think when I think about capitalism and the way that healing has become this individual process, I think it runs the risk of becoming something where healing is, and I think it is happening, where healing is being extracted from these indigenous communities to heal people from the global north when we see ayahuasca tourism. And so if that healing is only happening on an individual basis, then it is being extracted, oftentimes from communities where there's a lot of chronic illness, where people are not healthy. There's a lot of public health issues, sanitation issues, and people aren't even able to access traditional healing all the time, or even traditional plants. And then, you know, people come there to receive healing, and they do. But is it, I guess the question I pose is that that's one version of healing, but is it really healing if it's not in relationship with those communities? If it's not, if the relationships that the people that come to those communities have in those communities are not receiving equal healing benefits from that person being there. So how can that relationship be more, how can benefits from this process flow in all directions, where a person sees healing as something that they're coming into in every moment, and it has to happen in relationship with everybody that they're in relationship with. So I would say that if I had an intervention for capitalism, it would be that healing has to be seen as a communal process that involves benefits flowing to the communities and peoples and plants that have been sustaining these medicines for, you know, many centuries and generations, and that are not benefiting appropriately from these types of extractive tourism that are happening. So. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that what you just said resonates a lot with what Sidarta and Adana were saying. And now, Brian, what safety data can be meaningful to both communities and health authorities or regulators? And how can dialogue on safety between these two kinds of stakeholders be fostered in the name of crafting reasonable public policies and sacred plants?
Thanks, Marcelo. First, I just want to say, when Bia asked me to be on this panel, I said, oh, great, she wants me to come and speak about my work as a doctor and a scientist, and then I realized she actually wanted me to be here to help translate. But it's a pleasure to try to do all three. So, with this question, there's a few threads there, and just things I just kind of want to bring up that come from my work and the work of my mentors and colleagues that I think I would love to see just kind of more engagement with these topics in biomedical research that looks at the use of psychedelics, be they in a laboratory, in their synthetic form, or as we're engaging with communities that are using and have been using these substances in traditional forms for years and really generations. When it comes down to safety, this is one of the most important things for me when it comes to what does it mean to study the use of psychedelics, study plant medicines. I think that there's a lot of emphasis, especially over the last 10 years, in biomedical research that can show that the use of psychedelics in certain settings can be therapeutic and help people. But what for me is more important as a public health psychiatrist is to think about how many people in many communities have been and will be using these substances for not just because medical science said that it was therapeutic or helps treat depression or trauma or substance use disorders. They use them for other reasons. Some of those reasons don't really fit clearly into a DSM or kind of biomedical diagnostic framework, but communities understand that they can use them for healing that may be very interpersonal or about connecting with the plants or the spirits or the beyond. They may use them for knowledge, which is something that I think we miss a lot in biomedical clinical trials. It's not just about treating symptoms, but it's actually maybe about understanding why we have these symptoms in the first place, understanding ways that we can be more in right relationship with ourselves and others, and maybe actually just, if you want to use those terms, a diagnosis to understand what is the right way to do better in your life or be with others. So many traditional uses of psychedelics actually are about understanding the right way to move forward, not to treat something that's in your body or in your brain, and we've totally missed that in so much of biomedical investigation over the last decade. But when I come back to safety, this is where I think biomedical science can be helpful, right? So I am a physician. I do work just a few blocks away at the county hospital. I do see people who are harmed by using different substances or engaging in certain practices all the time, and this is where I think biomedical science can be of service to people who access psychedelics either through a clinical FDA-approved route someday or just out in the community through other models. We can gather information on ways that maybe people are having challenging experiences or have had a serious adverse event related to their even ceremonial uses. These can happen. But to do that research, to study safety issues, one, we need to establish trust with communities, to have an open dialogue, talk to investigators about what's going on, and then also know that if communities that use these substances are openly talking about things that don't go well, that it doesn't mean that necessarily regulators are going to come in and take away their power to use these substances and to self-regulate and to do a reasonable job of learning how to do things better. That's where I think dialogue with research can be most helpful, and we can support communities to, frankly, again, self-regulate and gain more knowledge about their practices, about maybe when certain types of quantities or doses are not right for certain people with certain medical conditions, or frankly, when they've seen that some people in the community are having a hard time with this sort of practice combined with that sort of plant, how are they empowered to share that with other communities within their community and with the biomedical research community? These are the sort of questions I would like us to do better at. And when I look at what is in the scientific peer-reviewed literature for the last 5 years, it's striking for me how different that is from what we read so often in biomedical research 15 and 20 years ago, when it was much harder to study psychedelics in laboratory settings for the treatment of conditions in patients. It was much more common for biomedical researchers to go to communities, to go to churches or indigenous communities and do observational studies and ask them how are they using these plants and why. And so that kind of community engaged research that really prioritizes the perspectives and practices that have already been in existence and are evolving and growing, that is something I hope that the biomedical study goes back to, even though we've become much better at finding pharmaceutical companies to make GMP products that the FDA will let us give to patients and try to make big trials with funding from either pharma or the government these days. I would love to see that type of research actually go back to being more community engaged and asking communities using these substances, even though they may be coming from plants or fungi, and you may never be able to patent them, I would love to ask communities what kind of questions are you seeing and what kind of health concerns are coming up amongst your members that maybe we can collaboratively try to address. Bea wants to clap. Okay. And to be concrete, because I don't want to lose people, I'll just briefly describe a little bit of some work that we're doing at UCSF that I feel really excited about, and it's going to take some time to sort of have results, but our research group at UCSF has a contract with the FDA to do a study called the Community Uses of Psychedelics and Safety Study. And one part of that is we have a community advisory board, all made up of members or affiliates of long-standing psychedelic churches in the United States, groups that use ayahuasca or psilocybin mushrooms, San Pedro cactus, who worked with our team to come up with a series of questions so that we can go to long-established religious and spiritual communities in the US that use these substances in a ceremonial and spiritual way, and then ask them about serious adverse events that have happened. But the way that we do that is we first, meet these communities, we get permission to come in and introduce what we're doing. We make it really clear we're funded by the FDA, but from a perspective of they're interested in public health and safety, not just in improving new medications. And we ask the communities, what safety lessons have you learned? What safety practices have you developed in response to things that you've seen in your community and other communities? And what would you want to teach doctors and scientists like us? What would you want the wider community to know? And it's been fascinating when we've been in contact with some of these groups. They're actually really eager to share things with us, in part because they're concerned about how psychedelics are spreading so quickly, and they want people to be able to, if they're going to choose to do this, do so safely. And so I think there's a lot of expertise that we can go and ask people who hold this knowledge, who've been through apprenticeship, dieta, and training, and start to ask them more, like, what would you want to share, and how can we do that in a structured, collaborative way? This is the type of work that I hope that we at the university do and others start to do more of. And I feel, like Sidarta was saying, I feel hope for doing more work like that in the future.
Thank you, Brian. Well, I would like to move over to the general questions for the panel. You can say who starts responding. And I'll start with a more maybe political or practical question, which is, are indigenous healers and indigenous communities able to benefit equitably from the commodification of their plants and rituals? And if not, how can we do that? Who goes first? Laura?
Sure, I can start. Yeah, so are indigenous peoples able to benefit? Did you say are indigenous healers able to benefit? Or are indigenous peoples able to benefit? Healers or peoples? Are indigenous healers able?
Well, originally the question was the healers.
Yes, okay.
I thought we were talking so much about community that I thought that communities should also benefit from that.
I agree, yeah. So I would say individual healers can benefit from the commodification of their plants and rituals. Oftentimes, not as much as other people in the commodity chain, whether it's oftentimes people that have trained with indigenous healers that are now offering ceremonies here or in the global north that are able to make, Bay Area wages on their practices. And then healers are still oftentimes, only the most successful healers are really able to have a steady enough clientele to sustain themselves year-round. But there's a lot of barriers, I think, to benefiting from the commodification of ayahuasca. I'm just going to talk about ayahuasca in particular because that's what I study. For indigenous healers, those can be language barriers or lack of land or facilities to host people in a way that's up to Western standards. So when we look at ayahuasca tourism, there's a lot of barriers for indigenous healers specifically to be able to really benefit from that process, and oftentimes they end up being wage laborers in healing centers run by foreigners or other folks. And so I think it's also really hard work where the most successful healers that are doing it are able to do it because they're having ceremony every other night for all year round. And I think that there's also just a lot of the potential profit from the ayahuasca tourism industry goes to the community because there's so much need in the community, and these communities are often dealing with a lot of other issues from general lack of resources to flooding to land invasion and land trafficking to chronic health issues I mentioned, and lack of infrastructure. So I think, the question for me is how can things like the ayahuasca tourism industry actually benefit indigenous communities as a whole and not just some individuals that are able to take advantage of the industry.
Thanks. Who else would like to jump in? Maybe Adana would like to.
Com relação a essa troca, esse ganho, né, que eles falam que é troca, né? Valor de troca, é assim que eles falam aqui no Brasil.
She's saying, so what you're asking me is about valor de troca, the value of the exchange.
Pelo que eu tenho acompanhado esse circuito xamânico dos parentes indígenas que estão indo para o Brasil e outros lugares, eu percebo que eles fazem esse movimento em prol do coletivo.
What she can see from her relatives, indigenous shamans that are doing this movement of going to the big cities, going to the urban centers in Brazil and abroad, they are doing this mostly for the benefit of the communities.
Tem uma situação que tem xamãs que fazem para benefício próprio de suas famílias.
There are those shamans that only do it for the benefit of their own families.
E tem aqueles que fazem esse processo para trazer para a aldeia.
And there are others that are doing this with benefits for the whole community.
Por exemplo, conheço, tem pajé que quer fazer uma casa de rezo, uma casa de feitio lá na sua aldeia.
For instance, the shamans, the pajés that are collecting resources to create a prayer house in their community.
Então, as famílias se reúnem na casa de feitio para poder ir na floresta, retirar chacruna, mariri, ir na beira do fogo, fazer todo o processo, que leva muitas vezes mais de uma semana.
It takes a whole week for the family or for the community to gather and then gather the plants, the chacruna, the mariri, and make the feitio, make the preparation of ayahuasca. It's community work and it's hard work. It takes a long time.
E essa ayahuasca, muitos litros, leva no mala para poder fazer seus rituais, cerimônias em vários lugares do Brasil ou no exterior.
And then they make many liters of ayahuasca and put in their bottles and then travel to the south of Brazil, to southeast part of Brazil or out of Brazil, abroad, and conduct a series of ceremonies.
E leva também artesanatos indígenas das mulheres e também os tecidos que elas fazem no tear.
We'll also take the art, the objects, the textiles that the women make.
E outras medicinas como rapé, sananga, cambô.
And other indigenous medicines like Kambeba, Sananga, and rapé.
E com esse dinheiro eles conseguem pagar toda a viagem, a alimentação e retornar com algum dinheiro para poder terminar a casa de rezo e de feitio.
And then, they travel a lot, and then with all the money that is gathered, they can pay for the expenses of the traveling, which are high, and then come back and bring a little bit back to the community so that they can, for example, build the prayer house.
E outra relação que também eles fazem nesses movimentos é fazer parcerias com os não indígenas que estejam interessados em visitar a aldeia.
And then they establish ties with non-Indigenous individuals that want to go and visit the community.
E pessoas que querem somar e contribuir com alguma coisa que esteja faltando na aldeia.
And then create a group of people that are willing to help and benefit the community and help with different needs that the community will
E eu, como
have.
aprendiz de xamã, só faço acompanhar o xamã e todos os processos que acontecem nisso.
As an apprentice, as a shaman apprentice, what she's been doing is to accompany these visits and witness these processes.
Então é isso que eu observei, os acompanhando,
This is what she's been observing.
que é o valor de troca que eles chamam. Eles fazem a cerimônia para auxiliar as pessoas a sair de uma situação, a se encontrarem, e em troca as pessoas dão um recurso financeiro que vai auxiliar eles nesses projetos na aldeia.
So this is what's called valor
De troca.
de troca, the exchange value. So they perform work to heal people and help people with their specific issues, but then they then will establish a reciprocal contribution to the community.
Thank you. Brian, Sidarta, want to add anything about benefit sharing? Or?
Well, I just want to say that it's very obvious. I live in a large city, not super large, but I live in a city, and I always have, and it's very obvious that the indigenous culture of ayahuasca is coming. 20 years ago, I didn't know anybody that would take ayahuasca that would not come from Santo Daime or from UDV. And nowadays, it's very different because every other week, there's a group of the Yawanawa or Huniquin or, mostly those around in Rio, in Rio de Janeiro, in São Paulo, in Natal, where I live. It's a large city, but it's actually, it's not a huge city at all. And it's getting, so this is very, how can I say this? If you have Instagram, then you can actually follow this around the country. It's happening, right? And more people have a contact with ayahuasca that is with these young folks, not elders, but young folks that are bringing many aspects of indigenous culture to the big cities of Brazil. And of course, this is happening out of Brazil as well. And as Adana just mentioned, you will also see lots of people from the United States or from Europe in the middle of Acre, spending time there. Now, from the little I know, I can see that there's all sorts of things going on.
Well, speaking of this trend of indigenous leaders in Brazil or healers going to big cities in Brazil and even abroad to offer this kind of vivencias, as they call it, experiences, they also sometimes adapt their service, so to say, their rituals to the public that they are encountering in big cities. And some people are a little skittish about that. I know of, for instance, indigenous peoples from the northeastern part of Brazil that do not use ayahuasca, they use jurema, the wine of jurema, another plant also containing DMT. And when they go to big cities like in São Paulo or Rio, they sometimes use ayahuasca because this is what people know. They don't know jurema. And jurema, the way they use nowadays, is not psychoactive. For sure not so psychoactive as ayahuasca. Do you guys think this is legitimate to adapt their culture and their rituals and the use of the substances to the public they are catering to?
Com relação à questão da jurema e da ayahuasca, né?
With regard to the specific issue of jurema and ayahuasca.
No Brasil, na região norte do Brasil, e inclusive na Amazônia especialmente,
in the northern part of Brazil, in the Amazon in particular,
a prática nossa, já que eu sou também da região norte, é ayahuasca.
what we do there is ayahuasca.
Já na região nordeste do Brasil, que são os indígenas do nordeste do Brasil, já é a jurema.
Among the indigenous peoples of the northeastern part of Brazil, jurema is what's used.
Dependendo também do povo, como por exemplo os parentes que estão na região sul ou no litoral, os Guarani, já seria o tabaco.
If you look for the people, for the indigenous peoples of more to the south, like for instance the Guarani, they will consecrate tobacco.
Eu soube que o povo Funiô, que é um povo da região do Nordeste, eles usam jurema.
The Funio people in the northeast, for instance, use jurema.
Eles estavam lá em Minas Gerais fazendo uma cerimônia indígena.
They were in Minas Gerais, where Adana lives, performing indigenous ceremonies.
E estavam na cerimônia, levaram ayahuasca e jurema.
And they took both, Jurema and Ayahuasca.
Eles chamam assim que é uma cerimônia de juremasca.
They call it Juremasca.
Como assim juremasca?
What do you mean, Juremasca?
Aí me explicaram, porque tem pessoas que querem experimentar ayahuasca, mas também querem jurema.
So they say that they basically, some people want ayahuasca, but they also want Jurema.
E os cantos de cada parente são cantos bem diferentes.
And the songs are quite different.
São cantos assim, de cantorias assim bem fortes que eles cantam na língua.
They sing very strong songs in their own language, Funil.
E nós parentes indígenas, sabemos que quando estamos no meio dos não indígenas, a gente só traz os rezos, só os cantos.
We indigenous peoples, we know that when we are doing something with non-indigenous peoples, the only thing we bring are the songs.
Até porque com os cantos as pessoas para poder facilitar a sua viagem interior.
Não entendi.
Para poder facilitar a viagem interior.
So that this can facilitate the inner voyage.
Porém dentro lá na aldeia a gente faz um pouquinho diferente.
But inside the aldeia, in the community, the ritual is a little bit different.
Dependendo do povo, nós trazemos também os ensinos da tradição do nosso povo.
So depending on who's there, they will also bring the teachings of the tradition of her people.
A gente não faz isso na cidade, a gente faz isso na aldeia.
We don't do this in the cities with non-indigenous participants, only in the aldeia, in the community.
Porque tem coisas que só é nosso, de nós indígenas, dentro da aldeia.
Those things are just for us.
Cantar sobre os rezos, os segredos que tem atrás dos cantos.
The songs have secrets.
Contar a origem de certas plantas sagradas, como nossos antigos contavam.
We tell the origins of our sacred plants like our elders did before
Isso
us.
tudo na força da ayahuasca.
We do it under the power, the strength of ayahuasca.
Ou poder resolver situações internas ou com relação a fazer trabalhos de cura e tratamento.
Both for healing purposes, but also for political purposes in terms of solving contentious issues.
Mas quando chega aqui na cidade, a gente só traz os cantos.
But in the cities we don't have that. We just bring the songs.
Porque é para atender uma necessidade aqui.
Because it's the specific need for healing that exists in the cities.
Eu não me sinto assim no lugar da fala para poder falar do meu parente de um outro povo, se ele deixou de usar a jurema para usar a ayahuasca e fazer juremasca.
She doesn't feel like she should be able to, she's not entitled to judge another parente, another indigenous Native American healer who decided to do a change like that, to replace Jurema with ayahuasca, for instance.
É claro que à primeira vista parece muito estranho. Por que o parente que faz uso de jurema está usando ayahuasca?
Of course, when she hears about it up front, she feels, oh, that's strange. Why would that person do that?
Então, nesse caso, as próprias pessoas daquele povo, no caso, vamos supor, os Funiô, eles têm que sentar e conversar e se entender por que estão fazendo assim.
So this is actually something for them, for the Funyo, for instance, to talk among them and come up with some
consequências
consensus.
que vai gerar disso?
What are the consequences that this may cause in terms of their own practice?
É isso que é a posição que tem.
This is her position.
Thank you, Adana. Well, I don't know if anyone wants to add something about that, because we could move over to the questions from the public. I think Stephanie would take care of that, right?
Can I just add a little thing? I just want to say one thing. If the biomedical environment can do all kinds of stuff with those molecules that have been identified, or keep synthesizing and doing all sorts of things, and marketing and branding it and so on, who are we to say that some cultural change introduced by, right? So I think it's basically to support what she said. I mean, that's up to them to discuss, right?
Thank you. If anyone has any questions, please come on up.
Hi. I just want to provide gratefulness from my heart to the panel and to everyone in attendance today. My question is directly related to the spirituality in the science, in therapy, and having the regulations be in place for the licensees to provide this medicine and help facilitate without the proper spiritual training. Now, is our certifications going to be very streamlined in the clinical field? Or are we going to be allowed to express more of the intuitive healing side of the medicine when it comes to licensing? So is this a two-part licensure, or is this a one-part licensure where they're not even required to take a macro dose and enter the shamanic state, so that if a client or a patient is in that state, are they able to go and retrieve that spirit if it gets lost in any way?
Quem vai falar? Ela quer saber se nessa coisa de licenciar a prática, a terapia psicodélica.
I'll say if, I mean, here in California, we have a bill that's going through the state legislature now, which is actually, it looks like if that were to move forward, some folks in the state government will want people with some form of healthcare licensure to be the folks who could then also be licensed by the state to become psychedelic facilitators. And this sort of question and this debate is happening in other states that are looking at regulating psychedelics for adult use. Be that more therapeutic use or just use without trying to treat a condition per se. But I think stepping back from just what's going on with policy in California, there's this bigger question that I think I hear what you're saying is, what are the real skill sets that our communities, our society is going to say when this is used today to assist people, to care for people, to accompany them? How do we also think about standardization and competencies for spiritual care that go beyond sort of conventional medical therapeutic care? And I think it's actually a fundamental question, is that we have more discussions regarding, do you need to have a doctor's license or a psychologist who's licensed to oversee psychedelic care? But what about spiritual care competencies, like we see in clergy, chaplains, shamans, other forms of ceremonial leaders, that frankly, those sort of competencies were not taught to me when I went to my allopathic medical school here in California and I became a physician. A lot of those, the work of spiritual accompaniment is seen as like a secondary benefit that maybe you'll get from someone in the hospital if you're sick, but we don't prioritize that here, at least not so much on the West Coast, if you're involved in conventional medical care. So I really actually look forward to the day, not just because of psychedelics, but in just conventional medical care more generally. I think psychedelic medicine will probably bring more attention to how do we rigorously train people to provide spiritual accompaniment and care when the psychedelics are not involved, because I think that could actually make healthcare a more satisfying and helpful experience for us when we're not even talking about psychedelic therapy.
Anyone else?
So just kind of piggybacking on that, I couldn't help but notice that in today's conference, I was really torn between the session that's going on right now, where they are actually talking about RFRA, and that is a context that's really specific to the United States and perhaps doesn't exist in Brazil. And so I am really curious in what milieus, like Brian talked earlier about a study that maybe where you're going into places where there are churches and actually doing spiritual care with these sacraments. But I am really curious, like, where are there really thoughtful conversations going on right now around exactly what Brian was talking about, which is that we have like two distinct like models that are almost like put at odds in some places in the United States right now, which is spiritual care versus psychological care or medical care.
I'll just say a few weeks ago, I was able to go out to Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, where they just had a meeting called Science on Spiritual Health. And there were a number of folks presenting on research related to psychedelic medicines. And the discussion and the engagement with spirituality within healthcare there was significantly different from what I normally hear in conventional medical settings here. I think within our own country, we have a lot of diversity, depending on where you are and which communities you're in, on how spirituality can be woven into psychotherapy and medical care. And I don't think there's just one monolith of medicine. There's many forms of medicine for many forms of communities. And so whether it's about spirituality related to psychedelic use because of RFRA, which refers to sort of some religious freedoms that some communities in this country have sort of ascertained for their psychedelic use, or just talking about how we talk about mindfulness here versus, you know, actual Buddhist meditative practice there, and how these are different and sort of woven into modern medicine these days. I think there's actually a lot of diversity, and I was blown away how spiritual care and psychedelic medicine in one part of this country, in Georgia, was just so fully embraced in a way that I don't often see it here. But so just being there and getting to visit them gives me like a lot of momentum for thinking about how can we actually do that more explicitly, but in a really grounded way that starts with making sure we understand the expectations and needs of the patient or the client. And then if we are to engage in any care that involves spirituality, that it comes from, it's patient-centered. It really centers on like what their community background is and what their needs are, and how we can bring an interdisciplinary team to address that.
Hi. Oh, add something. Okay, no problem.
Eu quero fazer uma sugestão.
She wants to make a suggestion.
Eu sugiro que nessa equipe interdisciplinar,
That in this interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary team,
já que vai envolver espiritualidade e uso de psicodélicos,
since we're talking about spirituality and psychedelics,
convide os xamãs
gotta invite the shamans
para participar junto com a equipe.
to be part of the team.
Thank you all so much for your work. Deep bow, and thank you for the conference. It's been incredible. I'm going to try to sneak in 2 questions and be really quick, sorry. One is for Adana and Laura specifically, and this is about this notion that's floating around of the rising divine feminine. And I just would love to hear how you see that, if you see that, if you think that that's what kind of lifting up of women's voices and women's practices and so forth might be needed, or do you feel hopeful and about what's already happening? So that's a kind of a broad question, I know. The other is about psychedelics. I'm thinking of you, Brian. Psychedelics and public health, that you don't hear those things together, or I haven't heard those things together very often. And I'm wondering, sort of, you know, I don't want to say SWOT analysis, but I'm trying to be brief. Psychedelics and public health, are you excited about the potential? What are your concerns? about that intersection. Thank you very much.
Okay, so divine feminine is a term that I don't particularly think about divine feminine as much in my work, but I do think a lot about women's empowerment, and I think that it's important to recognize that the women's empowerment movement is happening all over the world, and it's happening a lot in Indigenous communities now, even though there's still a lot of inequalities that exist in the communities I work in Peru, which is different from the Brazilian context. But that I see a lot of promising directions happening in those communities where women are having their own social movements that are really powerful and inspiring. So that, I think, is a really great thing that's happening and needs to happen, you know, throughout the world. And I think that's all I'm going to say about it now.
Com relação a esse empoderamento feminino, posso falar que no Brasil está sendo bastante intenso.
The women's empowerment in Brazil is very intense.
Foram muitos anos, né, do machismo, dessa força muito opressora.
It's been too many years of oppression by the macho culture.
E de uns anos para cá, no Brasil, as mulheres têm conquistado uma força incrível.
In the past few years, women have conquered amazing power.
As mulheres indígenas têm conseguido cargos políticos de importância no meu país.
Female native Brazilians have achieved very important political offices in the country.
No Brasil tem vários ministérios e existe um ministério chamado Ministério dos Povos Indígenas, coordenado por uma mulher indígena.
Now we have, it was just created the Ministry of Indigenous Peoples in Brazil, in this current government, and it was created and it's been led by a female activist, Sônia Guajajara.
E a FUNAI, que é a Fundação Nacional dos Povos Indígenas, o órgão responsável por também atuar com a população indígena, também é dirigido, coordenado por uma mulher indígena, a Joênia Guapichana.
And so is FUNAI, which is the arm of the institution, the governmental institution that takes care of all indigenous affairs, and this is also now led by a female indigenous politician, Joênia Guapichana.
Também deputadas federais também, como a Célia Chacriabá, muito lutadora, não teme, ela fala mesmo a verdade.
We have now some very fierce female indigenous representatives in the House of Representatives, like Célia Chacriabá, who is very fierce.
E muitas outras mulheres indígenas têm uma grande parceria com as mulheres não indígenas nos movimentos sociais no Brasil.
And there's a very strong connection, a very strong bond now linking indigenous women and non-indigenous women in Brazil.
O machismo está perdendo o espaço.
The macho culture is losing terrain.
Os homens têm e precisam aprender mais a amorosidade que as mulheres têm muito a ensinar.
Men must learn the love that women have so much to teach about.
E, inclusive, temos conquistado isso também dentro das aldeias, como lideranças, como caciques ou tuxauas das aldeias.
This has also been conquest within the communities in the aldeias, including the leaders, the caciques of the aldeias.
Porque há uns anos atrás só homem podia ser cacique.
Because until very recently, only men could be cacique.
E já existem muitas mulheres que são caciques responsáveis pelos seus povos.
And now there are many female caciques who are responsible and leading their communities.
Tem povos que tanto o homem quanto a mulher podem ser xamã.
In some groups, in some nations, both women and men can be shaman.
E tem povos que somente o homem pode ser xamã.
And among other populations, only men are traditionally allowed to be shaman.
Mas até mesmo nesses que só pode ser o homem, tem mulheres que estão quebrando paradigmas.
But even in those cases that are very strictly dominated by men, there are recent advancements and women have conquered these spaces as well.
Mulheres que passam por situações onde os homens fazem o teste ser mais forte para elas, para ver se elas desistem de ser xamã.
And in this very hard path towards being a shaman, often these female these female leaders suffer harsher tests. The male shamans will expose them to harsher tests to really see if they can be shaman.
Mas elas acabam vencendo, sendo vitoriosas, e todos os homens precisam se calar e aceitar.
And they have been victorious, and they have won the recognition of their communities, and men have to bow and defer to them.
I'm just going to make a comment. So, feel so happy to be here with you all, and I want to say that Chacruna is led by women. Traduz para ela.
It's led by Luna.
Led by women.
E ela está falando que ela está muito feliz de estar aqui porque Chacruna é liderada por mulheres.
And we are very lucky to have a lot of very non-toxic, wonderful male allies.
Que ela está muito orgulhosa de ter uma relação não tóxica das mulheres com seus aliados homens.
And I want to say that this panel is one of the more dear one for our vision for this conference. Vai traduzindo aí. Mas eu perdi porque ele falou. Tá. Mas vai traduzindo para ela. Because this is I started the talk this morning talking about the future of the psychedelic movement and the kind of psychedelic culture that we want to create. And what I said is that we want to create a psychedelic culture that learns from indigenous people, learns from people of color, and tells the story of the psychedelic movement, where indigenous people and people of color and women and people from the global south and LGBTQ voices are at the center and are powerful agents of the creation of this future, and not on the sidelines, and where knowledge about this sacred plants that we recognize that they come from indigenous people, and we want to honor that root and put our platform, our power, our privilege to help elevate those voices. That this is the psychedelic culture that we want to create for the future. And when we have billions and billions of dollars that are being poured into medicalization, into startups, into corporations, how many millions of dollars are being put into inviting indigenous shamans, indigenous healers, traditional people to give an opinion, to participate in the conversation, to sit in the table? It is completely disproportionate. So this dialogue is not happening, and this is a real shame, and this must change now. So I co-authored a paper with Sidarta and Adana that we called Neuroscience and Indigenous Shamanism, an urgent dialogue, because this is simply not happening. And this is really obscene that there is this boom and this momentum and this fever and this whole rhetoric about scale, 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 heal, heal, heal. And we're not inviting to the table traditional people. And we're saying at Chacruna that we want to create this culture that values this, not as a kind of eccentric curiosity, but as legitimate co-construction and partnership and horizontality, where you create these dialogues. This is what this conference is about. And Adana, you are just an incredible person. And I'm so honored that she's here. I'm also honored that Chacruna helped get her visa. And a lot of people get their visas rejected. We got Indigenous leaders' visas rejected. So thank you so much, Adana, and all of you for this incredible opportunity.
Woo!
Thank you, Bia. Anyone else with a burning question? Come on up.
Hi, thank you all. My name is Woody, and I practice as a mental health therapist in the Bay. And my question for y'all is, I've also dabbled in the ceremonial, ceremony spaces with ayahuasca and other things. And even in my work, I'll have people come in who maybe have what we call here as psychosis, right, in Western medical construct. And they get heavily medicated, from the Western lens, is just to kind of medicate, contain. I also know of people who, go to the ceremony space who maybe take a lot of medicine and end up having a psychosis, where at least I know of the Western ceremony leaders are not able to contain that and not know how to hold that. And so I've had friends who come to me to ask, where should they go, to look for help for these people who are having psychosis, or spiritual emergence, maybe is another name for it. So my question for y'all, maybe even people in the audience, is, where would you recommend, me look into, or where can I look for resources to help people who are going through these experiences that maybe don't just want to get medicated? Even people with bipolar, diagnosed bipolar or schizophrenia, which in another lens could be seen as having some kind of, bigger experience.
We've just got 2 minutes to answer this question if we're going to stay on track.
So, because we're in San Francisco, there's actually a long history of people seeking support for what you may call spiritual emergence, or struggling, after psychedelic or other forms of altered state use. There actually was a history in the 1970s and 80s of something called the Diabasis House, which used a model that did not prioritize psychopharmaceuticals to treat what otherwise might have been called psychosis. And then there's other folks who've worked with Stan Groff and other sort of teachers from the last few decades who've found other ways to work with patients that don't wish to pursue conventional psychiatric care. And yet I would say, I would hope to think that a good psychiatrist is someone that really listens to the patient, understands how they want to do their mental health care, and works with them in that way, even if they don't want medication. So I would try to encourage people, do talk to your doctor and see if they're open to having these alternative discussions with you. And if not, there are sort of community members that are providing alternatives to pharmaceutical treatments to decrease psychosis, instead help people work through what might be an emergence process.
Thank you.
So I think we are at the end of our discussion here today. It was really nice. I have loved to be here, and with Laura, Brian, Adana, and Sidarta. And thank you all for coming. I think it is a big result of all the discussion is that, first, that men should learn a lot from women. And biomedical research has a lot to learn from traditional healers and communities. And it's up to us to open this dialogue, convince more biomedical research people that this is important, and invite the shamans and indigenous peoples to the stage. Okay, thank you very much.
We're going to take a quick 10-minute break. Please
Adana
come back.
Sorry, Adana has a final message.
Eu trouxe artesanatos indígenas lá da Amazônia para poder fazer a venda para minha viagem do segundo semestre lá nas aldeias do meu povo.
She brought art pieces and craftsmanship to be sold so that she can support her voyage to the Amazon. So please help.
Além da campanha que foi mostrada aqui, também eu trouxe os artesanatos. Todos são sementes, tudo original da floresta amazônica, que é justamente para esse trabalho de ação social que eu vou fazer com o meu povo.
She mostly brought objects made out of seeds, and this is all the profit will go to support those communities when she goes there for her work.
Quem tiver interesse em adquirir uma peça original da Amazônia, é só se aproximar lá e ficar à vontade.
If you want an original piece from the Amazon, please come talk to her.